Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. It was announced earlier today that former undisputed super lightweight champion Chantel Cameron will be making her second ring appearance this year opposite the ring of former champion like herself in Patricia Berghult. You might be familiar with that name. That's the same Patricia Berghult that Natasha Jonas beat at 154 for what was then Patricia's WBC title. Patricia is 30 years old to Chantel, who's 33. They're both orthodox fighters registered as standing in at 5'8", but I think that's not accurate. I think Patricia's actually a little taller and a little longer than Chantel Cameron.
This is for a WBC interim title at 140 pounds.
Chantel sports a professional record of 19 wins with 1 loss, no draws, 8 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 20 professional bouts, and her lone defeat came at the hands of Katie Taylor in what was a very competitive contest, a very competitive fight, no shame in that. Patricia sports professional record of 17 wins with 1 loss, no draws, 4 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 18 professional bouts. It appears she's moving down in weight, down 2 divisions, from 154 down to 140. There are more opportunities down there. There's just more going on, bigger names, bigger opportunities, so it makes sense. I say it all the time. The real talent and the real depth in women's boxing is at the lower weights, below 154. So Patricia dropped a decision on Natasha Jonas in September of 2022. She has since rebounded off that loss with Maria Moderna in March of last year, and she fought again in September of this one. So she's on a 2-fight winning streak, and this will be her second ring appearance this year. To Chantel Cameron, who fought back in July of this year opposite the ring France's own El Hamechaled in what was a very fun fight to watch, action-packed.
This fight will be too.
So in Chantel's last fight, she fought a smaller fighter that was moving up in weight. In this fight, she'll be fighting a bigger fighter that's moving down.
Interesting.
For a WBC interim super lightweight title, that essentially means that whoever wins the fight is in line to challenge the winner of Taylor versus Serrano 2 via the WBC.
Sets up a potential Katie Taylor trilogy if Katie beats Amanda for a second time, or an Amanda Serrano fight if Amanda beats Katie, or you don't get either of them
for whatever reason, but you do get the WBC title. You at least get that.
Berghult.
Chantel Cameron and Patricia Berghult have a similar number of fights, but not the same level of experience against the same caliber of fighters. Chantel Cameron's quality of competition is, by and large, better than Patricia's. I'd say that the best fighter that Patricia ever fought would have to be Natasha Jonas, whereas Chantel, the best fighter she's ever fought, is Katie Taylor.
And Katie beat Natasha.
Chantel beat Katie, and then Katie beat her. If you look at their resumes, whether it's Mary McGee, Victoria Bustos, Jessica McCaskill, or Katie Taylor,
those names
tells a story that, by and large, Chantel Cameron's quality of competition is head and shoulders above Patricia Berghult's, but what makes it interesting is that Patricia is a naturally bigger woman than Chantel Cameron. Even though she's moving down, she's fought as high as junior middle, so she might bring some durability and some strength down there with her. We'll see.
I don't think she's as good a boxer as Chantel from a nuts and bolts perspective. I don't think she's boxing on the level of Chantel, but because she might be a bit bigger, that might make things a bit more interesting.
Chantel is a spiteful fighter. She's got a mean streak, and she shows it under the hot lights, so that makes for a fun fight. I'm anticipating a fun fight.
Set to go down November 2nd in the United Kingdom as part of a Queensbury Promotions show.
And we'll talk more about it as the fight date approaches.
Now listen, okay, because you know they, like I said, you got the haters, you got the detractors, you got this and that. Do you think they see like they got a gut drop on you now since your last fight? You think that's another reason why they coming to you? Do you think, I'm saying, you've been criticized for your last fight.
I look at it like this. Mm-hmm. If Fundora licking his chops
yeah.
over my performance with Majimov,
yeah,
I should be licking my chops because Majimov knocked Fundora out in sparring. So who should be licking their chops?
It's not how I would put it, because that sounds an awful lot like a triangle theory, and by now, the seasoned boxing fan knows that triangle theories don't work. Triangle theories in and of themselves cannot be the anchor for a forecast because they're not reliable.
If the argument is that they share a common opponent of sorts in Israel Madrimov, and Terence did better with Israel than Sebastian did.
No, that's a triangle theory is what that is. Just remember, Tim Tszyu did a lot better with Brian Mendoza than Sebastian did, but when Sebastian and Tim fought,
Sebastian won.
I know it was due to a freak accident, better still, things happen. Things are gonna happen in a boxing match. So just saying that Terence did better than Sebastian did with Israel, that's not a strong enough argument.
So you think Sebastian beats him?
I didn't say that. I'm saying I wouldn't go with Terence to beat Sebastian just because he did better with Israel. I would go with Terence for some other reason, some other factors.
Like what?
We've already seen that in spite of his height and length, his long levers, he can be gotten to. Sebastian can be gotten to. He was knocked out by Brian Mendoza, knocked down by Erickson Lubin, and bloodied by Tim Tszyu. That he's not so big and not so strong, not so tall and not so long, that he can't get touched up, that he can't be gotten to because he has been gotten to. And if those guys can get to him, Terence can get to him.
That's not a triangle theory.
No, because none of those guys are common opponents between Terence and Sebastian. Terence didn't fight any of those guys. It's not a triangle theory. It's an overview of Sebastian Fundora's defense. How defensively responsible is this fighter? You will remember that before that cut opened up on the top of Tim Tszyu's head, he was timing Sebastian with the right hand and having a lot of success early on before the blood streamed down his face and seeped into his eye, impaired his vision. You want to pay attention to that because Tim Tszyu, his arms ain't as long as Terence's.
But he was still able to catch Sebastian. That's what timing can do.
So you figure that if Terence Crawford has this fight with Sebastian before this year is out,
Or maybe a little after.
he's going to be sharper and his timing will be better because then, unlike in August, he won't be shaking off ring rust. He won't be coming off of a long layoff. That if Tim can time Sebastian Fundora, Terence can time Sebastian Fundora.
What makes it intriguing, what makes it worth a watch, is it still is a David and Goliath situation. Terence is only one fight into his junior middleweight campaign. He's still new to this
I
weight.
think he can do it, but it might be difficult. He's going to have to fence his way into striking distance to time Sebastian with the backhand out of either the orthodox or southpaw stances. Now, Tim's an orthodox fighter, but he was able to land the right hand with some regularity early into the fight. So maybe Terence comes out of the orthodox stance.
So he can land the right hand.
Because by now we all know you can land it. The story is that there was some effort to put Terence Crawford in the ring with Conor McGregor in a crossover boxing versus MMA two-fight engagement. One fight in a boxing ring, one fight in the octagon. Terence passed on that. I'm glad he did. I'd rather see him fight Sebastian than fight in a circus fight with Conor.
Even if the circus fight with Conor pays more money, it obviously pays more money. I ain't seeing any of that money. The fight I'd rather see is the one with two boxers.
Terence has this fight, wins this fight. He'd be only one fight away from becoming a 3-time undisputed champion. And I can't stress this enough. In this era, that's unprecedented. It's hard enough to become undisputed once, let alone twice, but 3 times.
That's a hard act to follow.
He's 37 years old now, so time is of the essence. But I think he has enough left for 2 more fights. Just 2 more fights to make that history.
I think he can do it.
Because like I said in my previous video, he already fought this division's dark horse. He already took care of the hot potato at 154. The other fights might be a bit easier than that one.
The Madrimov fight.
It's not saying that they're going to be easy, just easier than that one. Because that one was tricky, and we saw it. I'm all for Crawford versus Fundora if the Fundoras are serious about making it happen.
We'll see.
I can look around the world. I can just start in Asia. Why don't you ask Inui what he thinks of me as a promoter? What I did for Inui. Why don't you ask Donaire what he thinks? So let's move from Asia. Let's go to Eastern Europe. Why don't we ask Alexander Povetkin, who I signed from the Olympics? Let's ask Alexander Usyk what he thinks of me as a promoter. I'm talking elite level fighters here. Let's go to Germany. Let's talk. I don't know. Arthur Abraham, 3-time world champion. We got a bit called Kessler, 4-time world champion or 5-time world champion, can't remember. Myris Breedis, we could ask him. We could go to the UK. Why don't we go to the UK and why don't we ask David Hay what I did for him as heavyweight world champion? Why don't we ask George Groves? Well, did he call me a scumbag? No. Also world champion. funny that they're all world champions, and then we go to America. Why don't you ask Evander Holyfield what Callum did for him? I mean, Steve Cunningham, great cruiserweight unified champion twice. You could do a little world tour. That's the funny thing with me. I'm not really just a UK promoter. I've been everywhere. I'm like an old dog, right? So why don't you go around the world and ask these people what they think of me as a promoter, and then you can get a general knowledge information whether I'm an all right promoter or I'm not bad or I'm a scumbag. Simple as that.
What seemed like a long-winded point from veteran promoter Callie Saurland, who's been around a long time, more than people realize, when you take account of how many fighters he's worked with from so many different regions, many of them better and more accomplished fighters than Chris Eubank Jr. For Chris Eubank to say that Callie is a scumbag.
That's what he was reacting to. That's what he was addressing. And the point that he was making is he's worked with so many fighters. A lot. From all around the world. Many of them better, more accomplished fighters than Chris. And they didn't say what Chris is saying.
So maybe Callie ain't the one that's the scumbag. Maybe Chris is the scumbag, since he seems to be at odds with most everyone he's worked with in the past. Frank Warren, Eddie Hearn, now Callie Saurland. You hear the horror stories, or you've heard them, about how some promoters treated fighters in the past, but I'm afraid that many boxing fans, when evaluating situations like this one, are living in the past and not focusing on the present. That yes, sometimes the promoter's the bad guy, sometimes, but other times, it's the fighter.
A fighter in this era does have more autonomy than, say, fighters had in the Don King era 2-3 decades ago.
2-3 decades later, a fighter like Chris Eubank, in spite of not being all that accomplished, he has a level of autonomy, a level of say-so, that more accomplished fighters didn't have yesterday, and the amount of promoters that he's worked with, that he doesn't seem to get along with any of them.
Oh, because they're all the scumbags and not you.
Just remember this. Frank Warren actually filed suit against Chris Eubank Jr. and won, because Chris Eubank Jr. was found in breach of their agreement, their contract.
This was years ago.
Frank Warren was awarded several hundreds of thousands of dollars as a result of winning that lawsuit. That's Chris's track record.
You want to keep that in mind while he lays into the promoters that he's worked with in the past.
Maybe he's just a prat, a prima donna, who thinks that because of his namesake, he's supposed to have everything his way.
Maybe.
Saw two-time IBF cruiserweight champion Jai Opetaia react to Chris Eubank Jr.'s tirade at that press conference. This is what he had to say.
Mate, you know, it's I got nothing personal against Frank Warren or, you know, Eddie Hearn and stuff like that. But I've had run-ins with promoters, you know what I mean? You know, it's a touchy subject to sort of talk about, you know what I mean? Because I don't want to be writing a apology post tomorrow, you know?
Yeah.
You know, everyone's a bit
No, I'm not asking
sensitive
you to
and you
comment on what
can't
he
say
said,
things like that. But the way he said it and how direct he was, I was thinking, bust. You know what I mean? But it is what it is, you know. He should be able to speak how he wants to speak. But, you know, well, fighters aren't treated with the respect they deserve. You know, we're used like chess pieces on a chessboard to some people. You know what I mean? So sometimes they want to demand a bit more respect. You know, we're in there sacrificing our lives. You know, the pain and sacrifice we have to go through for years. You know, like I said, I deserve to be here. You know, like I have dedicated my life to this sport.
Boxing does require a lot of sacrifice. I'm not saying that it doesn't. But what sacrifices a boxer makes, they're making for themselves and their own financial gain. You're not a municipal servant. You're not a civil servant. You're not a soldier.
Don't get the two confused.
Your blood and your sweat and your tears, the sacrifices, the time you give, it's all for you, right? So that when a promoter picks a young fighter up and invests in that young fighter, it's treated now as if it's a moral turpitude for that promoter to expect a return on their investment.
This is business.
And you hear any number of $2 and $5 kind of guys tell you all the time that boxing is a business. Well, this is business, where the fighter sacrifices blood, sweat, tears, and time. The promoter sacrifices money. I mean, in case you're not aware, a lot of these careers don't get off the ground unless somebody's willing to roll the dice on these fighters. somebody's willing to gamble.
Invest.
You let the horror stories of the past shape your opinion about the present. And it's not exactly the same because fighters today have a lot more autonomy than they used to. And while sometimes the promoters are scumbags, sometimes the fighters are scumbags. So when a Chris Eubank Jr. gets up there and lays into every promoter he's ever worked with,
One of them sued you and won.
I ain't gonna shake my fist at the sky screaming right on.
Not for Chris Eubank.
Who's long been a prima donna, a pretty little princess that wants to have everything his way for no other reason than his namesake. Because without that, given the career that he's had so far, he wouldn't have got far.
That's the truth.
Another fighter with the exact same CV as Chris Eubank Jr. ain't gonna be making the money that Chris Eubank Jr. makes, and he makes that money because of who his father is.
His surname.
It's where the entitlement issues come in.
Don't poor fighter me. Think about the fighters. Oh, the poor fighters.
Sometimes the fighters are assholes. Sometimes what the fighters want to do, the fighters and their teams, the fighters and their managers, they want to make off like bandits with house money. It's not a moral turpitude for a promoter who invests in a fighter to want a return on their investment, because that's the whole point.
And the point is, while sometimes the promoters are in the wrong, sometimes the fighters are in the wrong.
It's not one way that I'm supposed to be a bleeding heart that pulls out the violin whenever some self-entitled fighter is making outrageous demands. No. Chris Eubank Jr., you're mad at Frank for what? Because he put you on the spot? Because he wanted you to fight his guy, Hamza Shiraz? Turkey offered you $5 million for a non-title fight. And that wasn't enough to get you in the ring with that guy.
And you're telling me that Frank Warren is the one out of line?
You're just angry they made you look bad. That's all that is. You say that Eddie and Frank and Callie, they're all scumbags, but Ben is all right. The only reason you think Ben is all right is because he's willing to overpay you.
To play it safe.
Ask the fighters. And it's always supposed to work out to where they make more money.
Regardless of who they're fighting.
All I'm trying to tell you is that it works both ways. Sometimes the promoters are the bad guys, sometimes they're in the wrong, other times it's the fighters and their teams. In this instance, it's Chris more than them.